Hey everyone, and welcome to a brand new video. Tonight we have 2 hours of horror stories ranging from haunted mansions, cursed jewelry, and much, much more. I hope you all enjoy them. If you do, please be sure to drop a like rating as it helps out so much in the algorithm. Let's aim for 1,300 likes on this one. I think if everyone took a quick second we could do it. Subscribing if you are new is also very much appreciated as I post content just like this all of the time. I just want to say a quick thank you for all of the recent support on the channel. The channel is growing really well again and I'm very excited about that. Anyway, grab a coffee, a snack, pack a bowl, whatever it is that you do to relax, and enjoy the stories. And of course, as always, I hope you all have a great night. I don't wish death on anyone, and certainly not my relatives, but occasionally I've entertained the daydream of inheriting a fortune. This is unlikely to happen because I'm not aware of anybody in my family that's rich. My best friend Rodney thought the same thing, but as it turns out, he had an unknown, estranged great-uncle that was absurdly wealthy. The cause of his death was unknown, as was the source of his money. But Rodney didn't seem to care. As the last living member of his family, everything was to be left to him. There was, however, one condition to his inheritance. It was peculiar but simple. Move into his belated great-uncle's mansion on the outskirts of town, and live there for a year. If he did this, he'd be set for life. If not, he wouldn't get a penny. His move-in date coincided with a 2-week business trip that sent me to the other side of the country. When I got back to town, I went straight to see him. He didn't answer his phone, so I figured I'd just drop by. Raindrops began to patter on my windshield as I pulled up to the private drive. The gate was closed and I didn't know the code, so my only option was to park my car by the entrance and slip past the wrought iron gates on foot. I pulled my jacket collar closer to my neck to shield against the slanting raindrops, and trudged into the mist. Massive oak trees stood guard on both sides of the driveway. Even the forest here seemed to belong to a rich man. There were no underbrush or scraggly pines, only ancient, dominating hardwoods that cut off the sunlight from any small plants that tried to grow amongst them. About a quarter of a mile down the driveway, the trees receded and gave way to a large clearing. In the middle of the clearing sat a behemoth. I looked up at the Victorian masterpiece that was now my friend's home. I felt small beneath it, like a child that was being scolded by an angry stranger. Up ahead, I could see that the front door was left wide open. I hesitated when I reached the threshold. "Rodney, you in there?" No answer. I stepped into the foyer and cautiously walked down the main hallway. The interior was immaculate and looked as if it were plucked straight out of the 18th century. An orange glow danced across the walls up ahead as small crackles and pops shot through the air. A fire was roaring in the biggest private library I'd ever seen. Books were stacked from floor to ceiling on all 4 walls. One leather chair faced the fireplace. A figure sat hunched over in it and stared into the flames. "Rodney, are you okay?" I asked. My words hit him like cold water as he snapped his bloodshot eyes in my direction. Where had he been? "Look what the cat dragged in. I'm glad you're here, honestly. The timing couldn't be better," he said. "Really? Why do you say that?" Rodney sprang to his feet and drug up another chair to sit next to his. Its metal legs scratched the hard pine floors like nails on a chalkboard. "Come sit next to me." Something was off, but I complied anyway. He glanced over his shoulder before continuing in a hushed tone. "How is it that a being is contained?" he asked. It wasn't strange to hear this kind of talk coming from Rodney. He'd always been drawn to abstract and conspiratorial ideas, but he was usually calm and collected. Today, he reminded me of a scientist coming off a bender. A being is contained in a body, I answered. Yes, and as people we're very good at identifying another person's body. But there might be other entities that are much bigger than us. Not as contained as you and me, but just as real. Why are we whispering? I asked. It's in the house. I think it's listening. You think the house is alive? Are you high? On the contrary, I've never been more sober in my life. Just go with me for a second. After all, they say it's the sign of an intelligent mind to be able to entertain an idea without accepting it. He always said this when he was about to say something extra crazy. Okay, fair enough. Tell me what's going on. If a house wanted to communicate with you, how might it do so? It doesn't have a mouth. It can't just come out and say, "Hello, good sir." It would have to find other more subtle ways to interact with you. It might influence a dream or emanate a certain atmosphere or feeling. It could even be as simple as a door that closes by itself at just the right time, signifying that you're on the right train of thought. Or the wrong one. Who says that a house would have altruistic intentions? I said. Exactly. See, this is why I need you here. You keep me grounded. If I'm going to make it through this year, I'm going to need your help. What happened to make you think this place is haunted? At this, a glossed over look spread across his eyes. Nothing. Just ignore me. I've been cooped up in here for 2 weeks and it's rained every single day. This place is big enough to get lost in. Speaking of which, let me give you the tour. Rodney seemed to revert more or less back into his usual self as he showed me from room to room. The house was a labyrinth. I'd need a map to remember all the hallways, wings, and levels. The only reason anybody would ever build a house this big is vanity. Would you mind staying here with me for a few weeks, just while I'm getting used to the place? You could pick any room you want. He gestured to one of the mini bedrooms that was nearly as big as my apartment. I'll be honest with you, Rod. This place creeps me out. I know, me too. He laughed. But I'm asking you as a friend. Plus, once I get that money, I'll make it worth your while. I'll stay for a few weeks if you need me to. You don't have to pay me. Thanks, man, he said as he clasped me on the shoulder. He showed me every room on the top 2 floors and the main level, but as we were working our way through the basement, there was one door that he skipped over. He didn't even acknowledge its existence. Wait a minute, I said as he carried on down the hallway. What's in that room? I think it's just storage or something. It was locked when I got here. I'm surprised you haven't bust down the door out of curiosity. I really haven't thought about it. There's only 1,000 other rooms to keep me occupied, he said. He kept moving, so I followed after him to finish the tour. That evening, after eating Chinese takeout and watching TV, Rodney retired to the master suite, and I went to the first room that I could find on the 2nd floor. The moonlight shone in streaks across my bed as I laid staring at the ceiling. I felt the blinds open intentionally. It always takes me a while to fall asleep, and I don't like the idea of laying there in complete darkness. I expected to hear the creaks and groans that are typical of an older house, but they never came. If I would have left the blinds shut, it would have felt like I was floating in space, like some kind of antique sensory deprivation tank. The morning dew on the grass was cool on my bare feet. I don't know where I left my shoes at. Come to think of it, I didn't know how I got to the front lawn in the first place. The winter breeze hit the exposed skin of my chest, alarming me to the conditions of my clothes. They hung off me in tatters. I looked up at the house, and my eyes were drawn to the far window in the attic. A pale, stoic face stared down at me. More faces appeared in adjacent windows. I scanned the whole 3rd floor. They were there too. My eyes flitted down to the second and then the main level. All of the windows held a white face, except for one. My door closed, and I sat up in bed, drenched in sweat. Footsteps paced down the hallway. Part of me wanted to crawl under the bed, but that's childish. It was probably just Rodney. I decided to go check on him. A dank draft met me in the hallway. The footsteps were now on the main level. I hustled down the stairs in a hasty pursuit, but all was silent once I reached the bottom step. I made my way to Rodney's room and slowly opened the door. He was curled up in bed with the slack-jawed look of deep sleep on his face. I couldn't be sure, but I thought I heard a small metallic click come from the basement. It was the same sound that Rodney's door made when I carefully pulled it too. I went back to my room, but I didn't go back to sleep. Just as the sun finally peeked over the horizon, loud clanging noises started on the main floor. I unlocked my door and went to investigate. "Good morning, my old friend. I hope you're hungry," said Rodney with a toothy grin. He was flipping eggs in a cast iron skillet. "I'll eat a little. I'm not a big breakfast person, though." "How'd you sleep?" "Like a rock." I knew he should be well rested, but the dark circles under his eyes said otherwise. "Did you hear anything last night?" I asked. "No. Did you?" "I heard footsteps in the halls. I thought maybe it was you, but I checked and you were sound asleep. Also, I think I heard a door close in the basement." "It was probably just the house making noises. I've heard all kinds of things over the last 2 weeks that turned out to be nothing." "What's in the locked room in the basement, Rodney?" He stared at me with that same crazy look he'd had in the library. The redness in his eyes seemed to smolder and burn just as the eggs were now doing. "I told you. I don't know. Do you think I'm lying?" "No, I believe you. I just thought I heard someone go into that room last night. That's all." He snapped his attention back to the burning eggs. "You were probably just hearing things. You'll get used to it." We ate our overcooked breakfast in silence as the sound of rain began to fall against the windows. I thought about leaving for the day, but the rain steadily increased, and with it came the occasional burst of lightning. I wasn't going anywhere until this cleared up. I went to the library and kindled a fire in the fireplace. After searching through piles of historical and philosophical books, I found something that was more in my lane. 1,000 Leagues Under the Sea by Jules Verne. I spent most of the day aboard the Nautilus, only taking small breaks for snacks and to stretch my legs. It was during the last one of these intermissions that I wandered over to a desk on the far side of the room. There was a journal and a pen sitting on top of it. It might not be good manners, but I opened it and flipped to the most recent entry. "Time slips by, and I slip under. I will not lie, I cannot shun her. As thin as age, as blind as thunder. I fear I have become asunder." It was Rodney's handwriting. I didn't know what to think. The TV turned on in the living room. I closed the book and retreated to my room. As I sat, barricaded behind a wall of pillows, the storm outside grew in intensity. Sheets of rain were hurled against the house and cracks of lightning threatened to knock pictures off the wall. I tried to ignore it and read my book until the power went out. My phone was dead, so I just laid there, hoping to fall asleep soon. I'd made up my mind. Rodney meant a lot to me, but I was leaving this house first thing in the morning. Maybe I'd be able to convince him to come with me. Powerful footsteps charged up the stairs like a bull. They were headed straight to my room and not slowing down. The door burst open and Rodney went straight to the windows, throwing them open. "What are you doing?" I yelled. "Do you feel it? The storm's trying to bring her down." He vigorously patted the wall. I didn't say anything. His usual level-headed persona was now completely fractured. "There's room for you too, trust me. Don't you worry about that." He was now pacing back and forth in front of my bed. "You're not as contained as you think you are, my simple friend. Don't you want to be part of something much bigger than yourself? Far grander than you could ever be on your own?" A door slammed somewhere beneath us. "Rodney, what's in the locked room in the basement?" I pleaded. "Isn't it obvious? My great uncle, of course. That was the other part of his will. His coffin was to be left in the basement. He didn't want to leave the house. Not ever." Fearful disbelief washed over me. I was temporarily frozen, but I forced my legs to move and got out of bed. Footsteps were now slowly plodding up the stairs. I stuck my head out the door, and that same dank draft wafted up to my nostrils. A tall, slender shadow danced its way onto the wall across from the stairs. "We've got to go now, Rodney." "Go? Why would you want to go? Just give up already. No one ever leaves here." I tried to drag him out of the room and down the hall to the next set of stairs, but he wouldn't move, and the struggle quickly shifted from me trying to drag him away to him trying to restrain me. He overpowered me and I tumbled backwards, falling into the corner bedpost. It broke in half and we all collapsed on the floor. The steps were now right outside my room. "To hell with this," I said as I grabbed the bedpost and cracked Rodney upside the head. His eyes rolled back and he went limp. I picked up the dead weight of his body and hoisted it out the window. He fell like a sack of potatoes into the bushes below. I looked behind me to see cold and stiff fingers grasp the edge of the door frame, and then I jumped out into the rain. It took all of my strength to pick Rodney and throw him over my shoulder. Slowly I made my way across the lawn and down the driveway. Once I had put enough distance between us and the house, I looked back to see a pale white face looking out of my bedroom window. In 2019, I was in an amusement park with two friends. With our back toward the sea, we took a selfie of us three together with a girl. She stayed at the center of the picture, dressed in plain clothes, with blonde hair and no makeup. She stared directly at the phone with a sad look on her face. Her eyes didn't reflect any light. I was the one holding the phone right next to her. James was to the side, had his sunglasses on, wearing a tank top and a cap, both white. Robert was in the back wearing a brown shirt and glasses with transition lenses. I thought the girl was James' girlfriend, but he denied it. He added that she would have been too flat for someone like him, and he thought she was Robert's friend. Robert smiled, but also disagreed. He felt she was my sister. The fact is, while we had this discussion, the girl was already gone. She disappeared the moment we took the selfie, like if she never existed. My friends and I stood there looking at the screen. We were unaware that day would have been the last one we saw each other again. A few months later, the pandemic struck. 2020 was in its infancy, but my New Year's plans were already down the drain. Forced to stay at home, I started scrolling through my old photos until I found exactly what you guys and I are thinking about. And my heart jumped in my throat when I realized James wasn't in the picture anymore. I placed the phone on the table, careful enough like I was managing a bomb, but fast enough like I was holding a poisonous animal in my hands. I grabbed my forehead and looked at the picture. It was just us two and a girl. Her eyes were completely black, devoid of any life. It felt like she was staring at me at that moment. How can the look of a person that doesn't exist feel so nerve-wracking? I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. When I reopened them, she wasn't in the picture anymore. I removed my sweaty hand from the forehead and called it a day. I couldn't sleep that night. Everything that had just happened terrified me. I turned on the light. The simple act of looking at my phone gave me chills. I didn't want to look at that picture again in my lifetime. The more I thought about it, the more I felt powerless and paralyzed. I picked up the phone and unlocked the screen. I pulled out the picture, and when I saw 2 bottomless holes looking back at me, I threw my phone away in the hope it would explode. It didn't. It ricocheted against the desk and landed flat on the floor. I took a minute to calm down, then stood up with my hands clenched into fists. I picked up the phone. She was now smiling, and Robert wasn't in the picture anymore. I laid down and waited for exhaustion to take over the adrenaline. A loud knocking noise woke me up the next day. I didn't realize I had fallen asleep with the phone clenched in my hand. I didn't know why whoever was outside the door wasn't using the doorbell. I looked outside the peephole, but I could only see darkness. The person on the other side must have obstructed it. The loud bangs kept going, and surely I had no intention of opening my home to a potential criminal during a pandemic. I was about to call 911, but the first thing I saw after unlocking the screen was the selfie I took in 2019. It was just me in the picture, and I froze. The heavy knocking kept going. The door itself was trembling, but it didn't matter. I selected the selfie and pressed delete. Silence. Thomas, my husband, and I have been married for 3 years. We have a beautiful home, a white picket fence, and a beautiful life together all around. We recently welcomed a baby girl named Ella into our little family. Everything was perfect until the sleepwalking started. Thomas has struggled with insomnia his entire life, well before I met him. When we started going out, he was very upfront about his struggles with insomnia, how it made him act some days, or how restless he is some nights. I never minded. I've struggled with anxiety my entire life, and while they aren't necessarily comparable, I could imagine how losing something as important as sleep would impact you. So normally, when he gets up in the night, I assume it's to play video games or watch a show on the couch. He is cranky some days, but we always hash it out. When Ella was born, and was needing changed or fed only every couple hours, day and night, his insomnia heightened and he was almost fully awake every day, all day. There was no dozing off, no feeling relaxed, or even trying to lay down. He was just awake. So, as a couple of months passed and Ella's schedule started to be more consistent, I was more than relieved to see Thomas returning to his previous sleep habits. Even better ones, in fact. His insomnia didn't just disappear by any means, but he was able to get a few hours or even a whole night in. We both figured it was from months of almost no sleep finally catching up to him. One morning, around 5 a.m., Ella cried from her nursery, causing me to wake up. When I turned over, Thomas wasn't in bed with me. Nothing unusual. He did still have nights where he wasn't able to sleep. I got up and went to Ella's nursery to put her in the bassinet in our room. After she settled back down, I walked downstairs to the living room to find my husband sleeping on the couch. I don't know much about insomnia, but I have learned that when someone with insomnia is able to sleep, let them. So I covered his legs with a little throw blanket and kissed his forehead, then went back upstairs to lay down. The next morning, I woke him up with some breakfast. When he was able to fully wake up, he looked extremely confused. He asked me how he got downstairs. I just shrugged and said I didn't know. I assumed he fell asleep watching TV. He shook his head and told me he fell asleep in the bedroom. You might have sleptwalked. You are going through a lot of sleep changes this year. I'm sure it's nothing to worry about. I wish that were true. We both laughed it off and continued with our day, not thinking anything of it. Why would we? Sleepwalking, while sometimes creepy, is normal. I sleptwalked as a kid. My parents would gently direct me back to bed, and that would be it. About a week goes by before Thomas sleepwalks again, but this time it was significantly more strange. I heard a woman's voice that I later shook off as a dream say, "He's in the house," and the sound of footsteps like someone was sprinting toward me. I jolted awake, going from a deep sleep to sitting almost upright in bed. I woke up only in time to catch a glimpse out of my right eye of what looked like Thomas quickly laying back down. I was terrified. Not of him necessarily, but from everything combined. I started to talk to him in a normal tone, to see where he just came from or what he got up to do. No response. I asked again. No response. I don't know why I was scared, but I started to yell, desperate for him to say something. Finally, he turned over groggily and sort of irritated. I again asked him where he went, still raising my voice but not yelling anymore. He informed me that he didn't go anywhere, and that whatever I was freaking out about was just a bad dream. Too tired to fight it, I just laid down and tried to get some more sleep, but to no avail. My adrenaline was far too high. I've had many nightmares in my life, but this one felt far too real. The morning came around and he asked me what last night was about. I told him everything, and all he said was, "Weird. That does sound kind of freaky. Sorry if I was snappy about it last night. I just didn't really get why I was being yelled at in my sleep." I chuckled and apologized for that. Told him I wasn't sure what got into me. The following night, however, was an entirely different story. I woke up at around 3 a.m. to an empty spot beside me. I decided to get up to check on Ella in her nursery, and once I found her safe and sound, I went to look for Thomas. I looked in the living room, then in each of the bathrooms. I searched in his upstairs office, the guest bedroom, the basement. I couldn't find him anywhere. The only place left unsearched was the attic, but it was still latched and there is no way to lock it from the inside. So I knew he didn't find his way up there. I decided it was time to look outside. If he was sleepwalking, who knew what he could get himself into? I grabbed the baby monitor, my cell phone, and the flashlight we keep for emergencies. I opened the front door and started looking for any signs of my husband. After searching the front yard for quite some time, I opened the gate to the backyard and began to look back there. As time went on, my nerves started to skyrocket, and every possible scenario was flooding my brain. Just as I was getting ready to call the police, I had a thought cross my mind. The treehouse. When we moved into our home, there was a treehouse in the property from the previous owner. There was clearly a lot of love put into it. So we decided not to tear it down so our nieces and nephews would be able to play in it whenever they visit, and so our future children could use it someday. I climbed the ladder into the treehouse and sure enough, I find Thomas. But this time, he was clearly still sleepwalking. He sat against the treehouse wall with his knees up, arms relaxed. He stared straight ahead of him with the glassy, emotionless look many sleepwalkers get, not noticing I was now in the treehouse with him. I won't lie, it was fucking creepy. I sat for a moment wondering what the best way to get a sleepwalker out of a treehouse was. I didn't think there was a way to safely guide him down the ladder, and I probably wouldn't be able to convince him to go down a slide in this state. As hilarious as the thought sounded, against my better judgment, I tried to wake him as gently as possible. Once he gained consciousness, he screamed. I had braced myself for some type of reaction, knowing before I woke him that you should never wake a sleepwalker, but felt I had no other option at the time. But this scream was blood-curdling. It was so loud and so intense that a few of the neighbors' lights switched on, and I heard Ella start to cry over the monitor. I started to try and calm him down, but the more I spoke, the more terrified he became. He proceeded to yell at and scold me, accusing me of somehow bringing him into the treehouse. I froze, unsure of how to react. Normally, at such a crazy accusation, I would laugh straight in his face, making a sarcastic comment he couldn't help but smile at. This time, though, based on the veins popping out in his forehead, I knew that would be adding fuel to an already raging fire. After what felt like hours, but probably just seconds, of being yelled at by my otherwise very loving husband, Thomas finally climbed down the ladder, heading into the house to sleep on the couch. I felt sick to my stomach. What the fuck just happened? I thought. It took me a moment to gather my bearings, but I was able to find the strength to get back up and go inside. I walked past my husband, who was already fast asleep on the couch, and went to the nursery to tend to Ella, who was still crying over the monitor. I picked Ella up and sat in the rocking chair, soothing her back to sleep. I thought about the events that just transpired and how I would approach it in the morning. I rocked Ella for hours and worried about my husband and my marriage until my eyes couldn't stay open anymore. When I woke a few hours later, it was to both Thomas and Ella's beaming faces. "Say good morning, sleepyhead," Thomas said to Ella. She let out a squeal of delight, and I couldn't help but let out a sleepy smile. However, when I locked eyes with my husband, I was furious, and he could tell. "Whoa, babe, what's the look for?" "Are you serious?" I snapped. "Do you not remember how you spoke to me last night?" He gave me a confused look, and I went on to tell him about the things that took place last night. How hard I looked for him, how worried sick I was, how scary he looked, and all about how he screamed in my face. He listened to me quietly, but with a blank look. After I finished my explanation, or vent more or less, he looked me in the eye and casually said, "Huh, weird. That does sound kind of freaky. Sorry if I was snappy last night." It took a moment for it to sink in, but I realized that he had said almost those exact same words he said the day before about my supposed nightmare. I raised an angry brow at him. "You said that yesterday." "What?" "You said the same thing yesterday about my nightmare. What's going on with you?" I guess I don't know." That was the moment the both of us decided he needed to see a specialist of some sort, or maybe a couple. A sleep specialist and someone else that can navigate any stress going on in his life. He went to every doctor he could find, but all the tests came back completely normal. Therapists and psychiatrists said, well, he has stress factors. The coping skills he uses are the best you can use, and shouldn't be causing any additional stress in his sleep. Sleep tests show nothing abnormal. As far as any specialist is concerned, he is perfectly normal. He isn't, though. During the day, he is still the man I married. He cooks and cleans, takes care of Ella as much as I do, kisses me on the forehead every morning, with a cup of coffee waiting for me in his hand. But nighttime is unbearable. Every night I wake up to an empty bed, knowing my partner is off somewhere, staring with that blank expression at nothing. Otherwise, I'm listening to him sprint up and down our hallways for hours, the reason still unknown to myself or anyone else. I was advised by the professionals to not bother him when he's like this unless it was absolutely necessary. So now I just lay in bed, night after night, losing more and more sleep as time passes, and this new family curse intensifies. I started to keep Ella in my bedroom with me with the door locked, forcing my husband to go to bed on the sofa. He had never given me a reason when he was like this for me to fear him, or what he might do to Ella, but he was unpredictable, and as a mother, you don't take chances, even when feelings are hurt. Which brings me to a week ago. We had dinner as a family, a nice roast my husband had made. We weren't on the greatest of terms, so the meal was a bit awkward. The sleepwalking was taking a strain on our relationship, at least from my perspective. I resented him for being the reason my nights were so restless, for making me feel trapped in my own room in the night. He had never felt better, though. He was laughing and smiling more, engaging with Ella even more than he used to. During the day, he was the perfect guy. We ended the night by watching a movie with Ella. It was actually really nice, if I'm being honest. He cracked a few jokes, and before I knew it, we were laughing and throwing M&Ms at each other, like we were now lovers again. By the time the movie was wrapping up, Ella was fast asleep in Thomas's arms. He carried her to the bedroom for me, but when he laid her down, he looked at me and asked me to let him stay in the room. He told me he missed falling asleep next to me, and he promised that if he sleptwalked again, he would go back to sleeping on the couch. I hesitated for a moment. I knew he could sleepwalk again, but I did miss falling asleep next to my husband. I gave him one chance, and he wrapped me in a hug and gave me a big kiss. I love you. Thank you. I woke up at 3 a.m. to my husband out of the room. Shocker, I thought. However, as I woke up a bit more, I realized Ella wasn't in the room either. I shot out of bed to go and find her. I knew in the pit of my stomach he had taken her out of the room, and I would be damned if I didn't make sure my Ella girl was safe. This time, I didn't waste a second getting on the phone with 911. I told them of my husband's sleepwalking habits and how I believe he is sleepwalking with our daughter. The dispatcher sent an officer out right away. When I found them, I screamed. My husband was standing in the middle of the street, holding our daughter straight out in front of him, a giant truck heading his way. My legs have never moved so fast before. Before I knew it, I was prying Ella from Thomas's hands and pushing him as hard as I could out of the road. He fell down next to the curb and looked up at me. His eyes were glassy, but he had a sinister smile. Bet you won't sleep now. I didn't know what that meant, but I started screaming at him, louder than I knew my lungs were capable of. The officer that was sent there only a few moments later, but by this time Thomas was gaining consciousness. He told the officer the truth, how he had a tendency to sleepwalk, but didn't know he could ever touch our daughter. The officer bought it and told him to just be more careful. We went back into the house after speaking to the officer for at least an hour. I took Ella back into my bedroom and locked the door, terrified of my sleepwalking nightmare of a husband. Bet you won't sleep now. I didn't understand what twisted shit he was talking about. Until now. Thomas hasn't sleptwalked since that incident. He no longer sprints up and down the halls in the middle of the night. He goes to sleep and wakes up in the same spot, never losing even a second of sleep. I've seen it. When his head hits the pillow, literally, he is fast asleep. However, I haven't slept since that night. My body is tired. I have tried, but I can't. Over breakfast this morning, I mentioned to Thomas that he hasn't seemed to be sleepwalking the past couple of days. He raised his brow. What are you talking about? Please don't fuck with me. The sleepwalking shit is already stressful. Don't start acting like I'm crazy. He shook his head at me and said he didn't know what I was talking about. I looked at him, partially furious, yet confused. Do you really not know what I'm talking about? No, sweetheart, I don't. You feeling all right? I looked at him wide-eyed. I started to go over everything we had been through the last few months. The sleepwalking, the sleep sprinting, the doctors, the tests, up to the night he almost killed Ella. Huh, weird. That does sound kind of freaky. What did you just say? Nothing, baby. How have you been sleeping? Michael Makonda wanted our house from the start. It was a nice house, 3 stories, 4 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, and a roomy garage. The house was not cheap to buy at all, despite the rumor surrounding it. It was the most generic rumor I had ever heard. A woman named Lizzie poisoning herself in the kitchen a long time ago when she couldn't afford the house anymore. But she loved it too much to ever part with it. Her boyfriend buried her body under the house as she requested. And, of course, now her ghost was supposed to haunt the house and hurt anyone who tried to hurt it. It was Michael Makonda who first told me and my sister the rumor. I rolled my eyes at him. "There's no such thing as ghosts," I said. My sister Jasmine elbowed me. She's really into the supernatural and ghosts and paranormal activity and all that. And I think she's even written a few creepy stories herself. Michael Makonda was a grown man living in another part of Blackthorn, the town we had moved into, and his house was falling apart at the seams. Mold and bugs everywhere, even on the outside. He'd always wanted our house, even though it cost more money than he could ever hope to have, and he'd cornered us on the street and told us this story. Michael smiled at us. It was not a nice smile. "That's what they all say in horror movies," he said. "And then the poor person who didn't believe is always the first to go." "I really do want to see a ghost," Jasmine said. She was only 9. Michael rolled his eyes at us and walked away, yelling over his shoulder something about how the ghost would probably be the last thing we'd ever see. I took Jasmine's hand and walked back to our house. The house Michael was so jealous of. The first hoax came next morning. Mom came downstairs and found a bunch of notes plastered all over the walls, all saying the same thing: "Get out of my house." Mom, of course, screamed, and Dad and us came down to see what had happened. Jasmine was excited as anything upon seeing all the notes, but now I was determined to catch Michael Makonda in the act. This wasn't just house jealousy anymore. This was breaking and entering. "But what if it's not him, Daniel?" asked Jasmine that night. "What if it really is Lizzie?" "It's not Lizzie," I said. "I'm gonna prove it." Looking back, I don't know why I was so desperate to prove it myself without any help from Mom or Dad. Too many years of media where the kid saves the day while the adults do nothing, I guess. I thought I would catch the second hoax. I'd set up my phone to record Michael breaking into the house, but when we came downstairs in the morning, the battery was dead. And it turned out to be doubly pointless, since this hoax wasn't even downstairs. When Mom and Dad opened their bedroom in the morning, a bucket of red paint fell on them, Carrie style. And of course, we kids got the blame. And that's when I actually told them about Michael Makonda. The next thing I knew, we were all over at his house confronting him. But of course he played innocent and pretended he didn't know a thing about the whole affair. But me and Jasmine, we knew better. Well, maybe not Jasmine, but I sure knew better. And I was about to catch him and expose this wannabe Scooby-Doo villain. Meanwhile, me and Jasmine were grounded until one of us fessed up to the paint crime. The night of the third hoax, I was patrolling the house when I happened to bump into Jasmine doing the exact same thing. "Jasmine," I hissed at her. "What are you doing?" She rolled her eyes at me. "Trying to catch Lizzie, duh. What are you doing here?" "Trying to catch Michael," I said. "Duh." "It's not him," said Jasmine. "Didn't you hear him today? It's Lizzie doing this." "There's no such thing as ghosts, Jasmine," I practically yelled. "He's breaking into our house and doing this." We argued for a while and went back to our rooms in a huff. Unfortunately, due to the barbed wire around the doorways, we couldn't enter, and were caught by Mom and Dad in the morning. I was hating Michael more day by day. The next day after school, I went around to his house and thought, 2 can play at this game. I went into Michael's house and found a tin of red paint, a roll of barbed wire, and an empty notepad. There were more items too. A bottle of bleach, boxes of dirt, knives. But the one that really caught my attention was the animatronic. A big corpse-like animatronic wearing a flowing white dress stood front and center in the whole mess. It was distinctly a woman rotting away, with mold and bugs and bones showing everywhere. And I knew just what he planned to use it for. I hadn't really had a plan to begin with. I just wanted to break into his house and do something to him. What that something was, I didn't know. But as I stared mesmerized at this rotting woman, I completely forgot where I was in the first place until Michael came home. I was grounded even further, and nobody listened to me when the next day there was bleach all over the floor. The fourth hoax. Even Mom and Dad were starting to slightly believe the ghost story by now. The fifth hoax was what I like to call the buried alive one. The house was filled with dirt top to bottom. I convinced Jasmine to come up with me to confront Michael about it. And all he said was, "Lizzie's trying to bury you. Just like how she is buried. She wants you gone." But I saw the twinkle in his eye, and thankfully, Jasmine saw it too. At the sixth hoax, Mom and Dad, I think, didn't care whether it was really a ghost or not. They just wanted out. And I think I would have reacted much the same had I woken up and found the floor littered with knives and cut my foot. Oh wait, that happened to me too. It happened to all of us. Sorry for the sarcasm, but this wasn't just annoying at this point. It was flat out dangerous. And Jasmine and I agreed. Whether ghost or human, we were going to catch this thing in the act, once and for all. What would have been the seventh hoax ended up being a night I'll never forget, and not for the same reasons as the previous 6 nights. Me and Jasmine split up patrolling the house, as we had done on the third night, except this time we were working together. I heard Jasmine let out a scream in the kitchen and ran to her, and there he was, Michael Makonda, setting up the animatronic of the rotting woman in the kitchen. I pulled out my phone, which I had had with me just in case, and took a photo. He just stared at us with an odd smile on his face. And then he grabbed a carving knife out of the block on the kitchen table, walking toward us with it. Jasmine screamed again. Mom and Dad were really heavy sleepers, and I was ready to run out of the room to get Mom and Dad when the knife flew out of his hand and embedded itself in his foot. He muffled his own scream. Suddenly, at the same moment, the animatronic corpse lady came to life and slowly started walking toward him with its arms outstretched. And next to us, me and Jasmine noticed something else too. A woman next to us, with short hair and jeans. But what was odd about this woman was that she was entirely transparent. I've heard the saying, "don't trust your eyes," before, but for some reason, I couldn't help but trust them now. She, like the animatronic, began advancing on Michael Makonda, who began mindlessly banging on the window he was next to in an attempt to escape. The transparent woman pointed to the door, indicating for us to leave, and we went back to bed. When we woke up, the house was completely ordinary. No animatronics, no ghosts, no Michael. I could almost feel the relief coming from Mom and Dad. Me and Jasmine, we were just shocked. I knew Michael was responsible, and Jasmine knew there was a ghost in the house. Neither of us, though, had suspected we were both right. They say if you stay in the kitchen of our house long enough on certain nights, you'll see an old man banging on the window. He is banging because there are 2 women in the room with him, both of whom want to get him. They are advancing on him. He is terrified. One of the women is rotting away and wearing a white gown. The other woman is wearing jeans and a t-shirt and has short hair, and an unspeakably angry expression. she hurts anyone who tries to hurt the house. I like piercings. Not the actual piercing aspect of them, of course. I'm a self-proclaimed wimp, but a stubborn one, so while I may yelp when I get my ears pierced, I'll stick through the pain and suck up any nerves around the experience. If I could fix my childhood arachnophobia with a bit of exposure therapy, I certainly did the same with my fear of needles. The pre-piercing anxiety is easy enough to overcome. The end result is worth it, after all. A new piercing feels like a new haircut. You walk out of a parlor and try to catch your reflection in the windows of storefronts, in the rearview mirror of the car, anywhere possible. You feel glamorous. But piercings offer something else. New places for jewelry. It's like if someone were to wake up with a tail or another limb. It's taking a part of your body that bangles and rings would have previously slid off, and with a few moments of discomfort opening up a whole new world of possibilities. Nose studs, earrings, septum hoops. There are so many bends and twists and options to it all that once you take the plunge, it's easy to start shopping for more. So, of course, the first thing I like to do when considering a new piercing is to shop for jewelry. Since there aren't very many storefronts near me with large selections of body jewelry, this ends up being a lot of online shopping. Sometimes brand name realtors, but more often small, independent vendors and jewelry makers either peddling discount resale or their own handcrafted wares. I like supporting small businesses, and I feel like the jewelry they offer is often more unique. It also feels a bit more personal ordering them from a small shop. And I love when I get a handwritten thank you note or a little something extra tucked in as thanks for patience with shipping delays. I got some free jewelry when I ordered my belly button ring. I had fallen in love with a belly button ring that featured a cicada, or a wasp, some kind of insect with long, thin wings in gold and blue tones. To get free shipping, I also nabbed some off-season Halloween earrings that were cute enough I could see myself wearing them, and after weeks of anticipation, my order finally arrived in a small, nondescript bubble mailer envelope. There was more in the order than I had purchased, and when I poured out the contents on my bathroom counter, the thing that caught my eye was a different piece of jewelry. It was a curved barbell, standard size for a navel piercing. The large ball at the bottom of it was a pearlescent, marbled white, streaked through with clear and some cream tones. It was striking, and the one I had ordered paled in comparison. It reminded me of an agate, with all the layers of striations. The receipt in the bag had a small note written at the top, a squiggly scrawl. It simply said, "Thank you for the purchase. A gift for you from us." The decision of which jewelry I'd start with was a no-brainer. The problem started a few nights after I got my piercing. I mean, there were inconveniences from the start. It's shockingly easy to bump your navel jewelry on things. No one warns you that you have to be careful leaning against a sink when you wash your hands, or that the large pocket on the front of overalls becomes a no-go for your phone for a few months. High-waisted clothing is out, and scrubbing with a loofah is a horrible plan. But there are so many little times that I didn't expect that it got jostled. I suppose all of that is normal. Growing pains are common when you're trying to train your body to accept something new. It was the fourth night after I got my piercing that I began to notice something was off. There was a dark line on my jewelry. Up until that point, I had only noticed creams and whites, like marble or ivory. I started to worry as I looked closer. Perhaps those original pale colors were just paint or a coat on the surface, and that my repeated cleanings and occasional impacts could have scraped away part of the patina. If it was painted, Could it be a cheaper internal material than I'd thought? Was that why it was given away for free? The bag didn't have any information on what material it was made of. The rest of the items were all surgical steel, so I had thought it was fine, but was that a poor assumption? Running my finger across the surface of my jewelry, I didn't feel any scratches, and as I turned to see it from different angles, it appeared that the dark line was below the surface. Maybe I had just missed it somehow. There were a lot of different colors marbled together after all. Regardless, it was too late to do anything about it now. Anyone who has had a piercing will tell you that you are supposed to leave your initial jewelry in for a certain length of time. Changing it too early can result in irritation. Considering how much I was jostling it already, I didn't want to add any more potential problems to my healing process. Besides, what would I have done? Requested a refund for a damaged freebie? There were other things that people don't warn you about belly button piercings. Earrings will occasionally get tangled in your hair if you have long hair. That's common. It's surprising when you find a hair wrapped around your belly button ring, but it happens. Similarly, irritation bumps are common with piercings, but when you get an irritation bump on a belly button piercing, the resulting zit-like blister can be large enough initially it tilts your jewelry to the side. It's incredibly unsightly. Repeated cleaning is often the best way to resolve both of these issues. It was about a week in, during one such nightly cleaning, that I found another hair wrapped around my jewelry. This one was short and wrapped around the post. Looking closely at it, I frowned. The small hair was a bit longer than an eyelash, and black. I do not have black hair. I racked my brain to think of where it could have come from as I carefully pinched it between my fingers. It wasn't until I tugged it gently and met resistance that I shifted my focus from the hair to the jewelry. The hair wasn't wrapped around the thin metal post. As I gently shifted the bar around to look from other angles, it looked like it was stuck on a white, ornamental ball that rested right over the navel. I tugged again, slowly to see if there was any more give, and met without progress. Squinting close to the mirror as I could get, I realized where I had seen it before. It was the same as the black line inside my jewelry. It is a unique kind of revulsion, realizing that there is hair where there should not be, like stepping into a shower onto a clump of something that squelches between your toes, wet and intrusive. Or like finding a fine thread in your mouth and having to fish it out, feeling it floss against your tongue, unexpectedly sharp. It is a distinct and awful revulsion, made exponentially worse when you realize that it is coming out of what you thought was a solid piece of jewelry, one you chose to put under your skin. It's an even worse feeling, realizing that it is not actually hair. When I pulled my hand away, it twitched, and then it was gone, faster than I had time to process. If I had to guess, it was just an eyelash or something that had gotten stuck somehow. My tugging must have loosened it, and then it just got blown away by the vent or something. That must have been it. That's what I had to tell myself, at least. There's no way that it retracted inside the jewelry. That would be absurd. The excuses I made to myself were what was absurd in retrospect. I had a dream that night. My jewelry was no longer swirling whites like marble. Instead, it was filled with coiled black threads, all bound by a thin, clear membrane. In my dream, I poked it with a needle and then gently squeezed it between my fingers like a grape. It popped in my hand, and black things like a child's marker scribbles spilled out onto the counter. In my surprise, I pricked myself with the needle I was holding, and it stung near my navel. When I went to wash my hands of the mess, the black crawled up my arms, scurrying away from the water. I woke up sweating right as they began climbing my neck. I wasn't surprised when I went to clean my jewelry and found an irritation bump. They form similar to blisters due to friction on an area, and when someone twists jewelry around the way I had done, it happens. Actions have consequences. Just like zits, they go down over time, or can be lanced and drained of pus and blood if they grow too large. No sign of hair at least, so I was counting it as a victory. The next time I saw it was over a week later, when I had almost convinced myself it was all in my head. Almost. The knot hair was longer this time, and I didn't touch it to begin with as I looked from different angles. It was sticking out of the same spot, and still appeared to be connected to the rest inside. This time I grabbed it with tweezers to make sure I had a good grip, and I tugged hard. I expected it to snap off at the base, where it met the surface of the jewelry, or perhaps for the whole twitching thread would come out. I didn't expect the jewelry itself to bulge outward with the tug. I didn't expect the amount of resistance, and then the feeling of something breaking free. The passage left a small crater in the top of the marble ball. The casing caved in without its filling. Despite all of my worst suspicions, I didn't truly expect to be left holding something writhing, its long, spindly leg gripped firmly in my tweezers. It looked like a tick, but with the fine legs of a spider. Perhaps it was just a spider, but that flat body was so thin as to almost appear disc-like, two-dimensional, like a dark line when viewed at an angle. And the mandibles, fangs, whatever it was, it looked cruel. Even without the sharp appendage by its abdomen, I could only imagine it to be a stinger. I won't lie, I panicked. I know that it would have been smart to keep it for identification purposes, or even just to take a picture of it, but I needed it as far from me as possible. Tweezers and a death grip, I ran out the backyard and threw the whole handful into the far bushes before bolting back inside to make sure there weren't more of them dangling from my skin. Much as I searched, and trust me, I searched, that appeared to be the only one. As soon as I felt sure that more wouldn't burst out of me, I went back to the piercing shop to have them take out my jewelry. I spared them the lengthy explanation because who would believe me? At first, my piercer cautioned me about changing my jewelry so soon, warning it would likely hurt and cause further irritation. But when they saw the carnage of my current jewelry, I think they were too surprised to push further beyond agreeing that yeah, it was probably a good idea to change it out. They switched my deflated nightmare fuel for a solid titanium piece that they assured me was from a reliable manufacturer. I tried checking for more information on my online vendor, but the shop appears to have been deactivated since my purchase. The irritation bump hasn't gone down yet, but I suppose growing pains are common when you're trying to train your body to accept something new. It's tempting to pick at it, but I know that wouldn't be good for me. As for the jewelry, I doused it in alcohol and sealed it in a Ziploc bag. Several days of monitoring hasn't shown any sign of motion. I did the same for all the other pieces I purchased from the vendor. No sign of life there either. But I don't think I'll be able to trust Annie enough to wear them. Maybe I can just give those away or something if I bump into someone else with a navel piercing. A gift from me. For them. To give some backstory, every night for the past month I kept hearing something outside my window. As soon as I would lay in bed, it would scratch at the glass, making it impossible to sleep. At first I thought it was a raccoon or something, but after the second day, I knew it wasn't a raccoon. The scratching was too consistent, like it was done with purpose. Yesterday, it happened again. I was awoken by what sounded like nails on a chalkboard. The clawing continued, inching me closer to insanity. Deciding I'd had enough, I jumped and tore my blinds open. Something ducked. For an inch of a second, I could see a figure. but as quickly as I saw it, it disappeared. I sat motionless on my bed, my mind far too tired to make a rationale for this. Before I could even try, something hard collided with the glass, almost making it shatter. I jolted and, like a child, pulled the blanket over my body as if that would help. The window creaked open and my blood froze in my veins. Slender fingers pressed down on me. The body of the thing entering my room. I couldn't move. I couldn't even scream. The bitter coldness of it hurt me more than the pressure. My breath caught in my throat. I figured I was suffocating because of the noise coming out of my mouth, but I realized the sound wasn't coming from me. Its vocal cords splintered while attempting to speak, or at least that's what I think it was doing. It was trying to communicate something to me. I just didn't know what. A hand reached out, fingertips caressing my cheek. A painful mixture of cold and wet spread across my face. Open is what I assume it said. It was hard to hear over the sound of crackling vertebrae. Again the creature wheezed out. Are you awake? The voice continued in an inhuman replica of a human. Please, look at me. It sounded like speaking tore its throat apart. Once its vile breath hit my face, it took everything I had to not vomit. Every day? The creature hissed, gagging on its own tongue. Every day, I've tried to make you acknowledge me, but you never looked. Why do you fear me? What have I done to you? Silence prompted me to reply, which I ignored. I know what it is. You fear what I am, or what I am not. I can change for you. Liquid dropped onto my face, emanating a vile stench. I didn't know if it was saliva or blood, and I didn't want to. Slowly but surely, the voice sounded more human. You love your family, right? I waited for it to continue. Silence, a sound I hadn't heard in years. I wasn't sure whether I should have been relieved or afraid. Stuck with my thoughts for so long, I finally felt free of the monster. That thing had finally left me. Its voice had ceased. Yet the feeling of being watched intensified. I wasn't free at all. If I looked, I'd see it standing over me. Then came a horrific snapping sound, and the creature began moaning in pain. I assumed that the terror I felt could not be any more prominent. But I was wrong. So wrong. The voice that came out was no longer the creature's, but something very familiar. It was a poor imitation of it, but I could tell with every fiber of my being that it was my mother's. I'm sorry I've been neglecting you, she said, her voice dripping with guilt. I promise I won't leave you anymore. Vomit threatened to let loose out of my mouth. My teeth were moments from cracking as I held my jaw shut. I was no longer dealing with just a mindless monster. It was smart. Alex, honey, please say something. Anything? My mother's voice echoed again. Alex, it repeated. This time, hands gripped my body and shook it. Goosebumps grew on my arm as the chilling temperature of her body seeped into mine. It pulled my blankets off of me, leaving me exposed to the air. Open your eyes, the demand continued. The voice was not my mother's anymore. The creature's facade broke, and it knew. Its fingers changed back to the lanky, bony sticks that I felt before. It finally let go of my arm, and the frost faded. No, it moaned out. I didn't want to admit it, but the violent sobs that ensued sounded genuine. The possibility that this creature was capable of human emotion frightened me. It then scampered out of my room, having the decency to close the window behind it. Even after what felt like minutes had passed, I didn't dare to move. This could have been another one of its tricks. I lay in bed, too afraid to cover myself. too afraid to move. The blaring siren of the alarm clock tore through my sleepy haze. I rolled out of bed with a groan, and as I stood up, I looked out of the window. It was morning. Relief washed over me. I escaped the creature's trap. I breathed in deeply, relishing the cool air that tickled my lungs. After basking in my victory, I began getting prepared. By the time I was downstairs, my sister was already eating breakfast. She was facing away, oblivious to the fact that I was staring at her. "Morning," she said with a small smile upon noticing me. "Didn't expect to see you up so early." "Oh, shut up," I mumbled back, hiding the solace I felt from hearing her voice. Although I was hungry, I couldn't bring myself to eat. I sat on the opposite side of Lily and scrolled through my phone. She just watched. While I tried to ignore her stare, it only got worse. "Mom's already out," Lily mumbled, her eyes finally finding another target. "She said that you can order something for dinner." Did she mention anything about hearing stuff at night? My question must have sounded desperate because upon asking it, Lily's smile dissipated, worry lingering in her eyes. She paused, her pupils looking up like she was searching for the answer. "No, she didn't." "Why?" I leaned in closer, oblivious to how uncomfortable she looked. "What about you? Did you hear a voice? Or banging? Or scratching? Or anything?" She moved back in response. "No. Are you okay? You're making me worried. Did you hear, someone try to break in or something?" I stopped when I looked at Lily's expression. She was looking at me like I was mad. Shaking my head, I pulled my hair back. "No, it was just a nightmare then." I'm not sure if I said that to convince me or her. Either way, we both knew there would be no point in discussing the subject further. We ate our meals in silence, and after we finished eating, Lily hopped out of the seat. "Okie dokie, I'm leaving." She pranced beside me, giving me a peck on the cheek. She headed toward the door, and I heard it close behind her. My fingers hovered over where her lips had planted and frowned. They were frigid. A couple of minutes after she left, I began writing this. I couldn't go to school, feeling absolutely sick to my stomach. I genuinely don't know what to do. It feels like I'm going insane, but everything seems so real. This didn't feel like a dream. I could still feel the lingering cold on my cheek from her kiss. I don't know why I'm writing this. Maybe it's because I thought I could get some help or an answer that'll solve everything. Doesn't matter what, because all I need is one question answered. Am I going insane? It had been a late night at work. My feet dragged under me as I made my way to the subway station. I wondered to myself if all these late shifts were worth the paycheck. The pay was all right, and I never had to budget very much, but the back pain was beginning to catch up to me. I should really pick up some more Excedrin on my way home, I thought, forcing my feet down the stairs. What am I even doing anymore? I have no passion for my work. What happened to that childlike wonder I used to have? Wasn't I gonna go somewhere with my life? I glanced at my phone. 11:13. I sighed. Guess reality beat me into submission at some point along the way. What did I even want to do? Scanning my card, I made my way through the turnstiles to where the subway would be meeting me in about 15 minutes. How did I forget what I wanted to do? Did I get too caught up in my work life? I had passion, ambition. That's why I started working here. I wanted to make enough money to do something, didn't I? Sitting down at a bench, I took a deep breath, pulled out my phone to check for any notifications. 2 awaited me, both being random Facebook notifications from a group I'm in. As I opened the Facebook notification, I began to hear and feel a rumbling from the left side of the station. Checking the time showed 11:16. Guess they're early, I thought, putting my phone back in my pocket. A small gust of wind slapped me in the face as the train whizzed and began to slow. It took longer than usual to stop, but eventually, with the last cart left in the station, I made my way to the train. The door opened as I approached, and as I got on, I glanced around. There were a few other people in there, all looking just to the side of me, as if they were trying to avoid eye contact. Guess the conductor's having an off day, huh? I chuckled, not receiving any response. A few seconds after the awkward silence, I made my way to an empty seat. I took a few more glances around, but everyone seemed to be doing their own thing, waiting for their stop. Another stop came. An older-looking bald man with a fedora got on, sitting next to me. A couple more stops came and went, the cart only seeming to gain more people, and a few more stops before I could get off. At the next stop, the old man turned to me. I glanced over at him, noticing he was wearing a well-fitted charcoal suit. "Can I help you?" I asked politely. The man spoke, looking to the right of me. "I'm not sure you're on the right train." I got a little nervous, wondering if I had really accidentally gone to the wrong side of the station. "Is this one not going south?" "No, it is," he chuckled. "You just hopped on a little early, didn't you? The trains are never late here, you know." I let out a short laugh. "Okay, buddy." I turned back to my phone, waiting for my stop to come, then waited. Time kept on passing, but no more stops came. Before I could try to get up to call for the train to stop, my eyes grew heavy. I felt like I'd just been injected with 50 milligrams of melatonin. Before I knew it, I was out. The sun was shining in my eyes when I awoke. Nothing felt real. Standing up was a chore. I felt shaky. As I tried to focus my eyes, I found they wouldn't. Not on what I was intending them to. I made my way to the door lightheaded, wondering if I'd caught something the day before. Stumbling out the door, I was greeted with an above-ground station midday. There seemed to be a lot of people getting off, but no one getting on. I was so disoriented I couldn't tell where I was, but something wasn't right. I was sure of that. Subways didn't go above ground, did they? I practically fell down the platform, the lack of control in my legs making movement difficult. Careening my way to the sidewalk, a couple people asked me if I was feeling all right. Due to my lack of energy, I passed them by. I put all my effort in trying to focus on a street sign. Keldon Avenue. Where's that supposed to be? I pulled out my phone, putting my hand over my eyes to block out the unrelenting blaze above. 8:17. I tried to do the math in my head to figure out how long I'd been out, but it was too much for my fogged mind. The world was a haze. What's going on with me? I thought, checking to see how many bars I had. Though it was hard to tell from the blur, it seemed I didn't have any service. I let out a shallow moan, putting away my phone. A few people looked in my direction, but quickly went back to what they were doing. After 30 or so minutes of waiting for a taxi, I decided stumbling my way to the nearest hospital would be my best shot. As time went on, it felt as though I was walking the same street on repeat. My head fog seemed to improve slowly over time, but the fever dream feeling persisted. After a couple hours had passed, it had begun to get dark. Was I hallucinating now? It seemed real. I kept walking, trying to see if there was anywhere I could stay at the very least. As time passed, I soon came across an empty parking lot with a large sign. I looked up hazily. Hotel Grande. Glancing around, I didn't see any other buildings nearby. I was in the middle of some forest. Deciding I didn't have any other options, I headed for the entrance. Opening the door, I found a middle-aged man reading a newspaper sitting at a desk. Walking over to him, I realized I couldn't tell what kind of paper he was reading. as if it were in another language. Focusing on the page, I could tell it was English, but it was like my brain couldn't piece the letters together. "Excuse me, sir. I'd like to rent out a room." The man glanced up, not putting his newspaper down. "Another one of you, huh? Room 215 is open." He went back to reading. "How much?" "What?" "I'm asking how much for the room." My fevered state being the only reason I wasn't growing agitated. He finally put the paper down. "Look, kid, it's open. No charge, no key. Just go to room 215, go to sleep, and everything will be fine. Disturb me again and I'll throw your scrawny ass out." Deciding I'd rather not be thrown to the curb, I decided to head to the room. When I got there, I noticed there wasn't any sort of smell to the place, like it had been cleaned with pure neutral water. Not even a hint of a cigarette, despite the overall shabby appearance of the room. Exhaustion overwhelming, I laid on the bed. I didn't even have time to pull a blanket over me before everything went dark. I didn't dream that night. I'm not entirely sure why, but when I woke up, I didn't feel much different. I was a little less exhausted, but the fevered sensation was still strong. Heading downstairs, I walked out the door. I thought I heard the man mumble something, but I couldn't bring myself to care. I felt as though I was gliding as I continued walking. I was unsure of where I was going, but moving was the only thing that kept me tethered to reality. Whenever I stopped, I'd feel myself begin to slip back into an unconscious state. The blurs that passed me by left me with mere impressions of what they could be. Eventually, I found myself at a small footbridge. Looking down, I saw there was a narrow creek underneath. Once I felt myself beginning to fade, I stepped onto the bridge, making it to the other side. I found a pitch-black horse standing a little ways away, staring at me. My slipping reality forced me to make my way to the horse. Reaching out a hand, it tilted its head back, avoiding my touch. "What are you doing here?" A voice overtook the area around me. I jumped back, nearly tripping over my numb legs. Nervous, I glanced around, trying to focus on anyone that might be around. Not seeing anyone, I approached the horse again, cautiously. "You slipped out of your reality yesterday. You must find yourself again." I took a couple steps back, heart hitting my chest. "What?" The horse looked me directly in the eyes, opened its mouth. The mouth then split straight down the center. Each part of the mouth curled outward, revealing a mouth of jagged teeth lining every inch of gums. "I advise you find yourself again before you fade." The creature then turned and walked away. Turning around, I floated back the way I'd come. Everything seemed more distorted than before. Though, with time, I eventually found myself running into people again. Their faces seemed off, none of them looking quite real. Larger than normal eyes for some reason, displaced noses for others. Some had no mouths whatsoever. Eventually, I found my subconscious leading me somewhere. I couldn't derail myself from wherever I was going. Time passed, and I ended up finding myself in front of a seemingly familiar home. Checking the door, I was thankful it was unlocked. As I entered, I heard people talking. Their words were indiscernible, but I was sure there were people somewhere. Heading to the out-of-focus kitchen, it sounded as though they may be downstairs. I walked around every room, trying to make out a stairway. Eventually, I found it. Through a doorway in the corner of the living room, I made my way downstairs. Their voices immediately became more audible, but all I could hear was gibberish. Not quite like they were speaking another language, per se. More like I was no longer capable of understanding English. I knew their words should have been making sense, but it was like my brain couldn't connect each word to the other. As I took each step down the winding stairs, my brain fog became far more unrelenting. I was in a haze, hardly able to process the limited visual information around me. Is there even a light here? I looked up as my feet glided down the winding steps. I knew there was light coming from somewhere, but it was as if the air itself was producing it. Finally, I reached the final step and the voices stopped. I looked ahead to make out 4 figures. Aside from some vague details, they appeared to be mere silhouettes. 2 of them were looking to my left, 1 to my right, and the last just above my head. Excuse me, I don't mean to interrupt. My body nearly gave out from under me. I'd begun to lose sensation in my body. I couldn't feel the feet in my shoes, the shirt I was wearing, nor the belt around my waist. All that existed in that moment was the dwindling consciousness. I don't mean to interrupt, but do I know you? The one looking to my right asked something, though I couldn't make out any words. A few moments passed and a more stern-sounding statement came from the one looking above me. When the 2 looking to my left said something, they all began repeating the same sound. I knew I recognized them, but it was like they were chanting for me to leave. When one took a step toward me, I ran up the stairs as fast as I could. Once I made it out of the house, I collapsed to the ground, deep panting until the smallest amount of focus returned to me. I was finally able to feel the shoes on my feet again. As I rose, a sudden shrieking began stabbing my eardrums. I held my hands over my ears before suddenly understanding what the shrieking was saying. I bolted as fast as I could, tripping a few times as I regained sensation in my legs. I had to run full speed, there was no avoiding it. As I pumped my arms, I began feeling the muscles and weight they carried. The head fog began to clear when I slipped, turning a corner, scraping my right side up pretty bad. Refusing to fade, I got back up, pushing the pain to the back of my mind. There was no way I would let this vision, or afterlife, or whatever the hell it was, beat me. I refused to let myself go. I finally made it right as one last ungodly shriek sounded through the train station. I paused for a moment, panting before heading to the door that had begun closing. I tried screaming to wait as I picked up speed again, but the train wasn't stopping. I ran full speed, managing to get my fingers in the door, but I couldn't pry it open, and no one was on the train to help me. The train began to move, and I couldn't do anything. I tried pulling my fingers out at first, but that was just as ineffective as prying the thing open. Hey, help! Someone help! It isn't stopping and I'm stuck! But it was all for nothing. No one would even look in my direction. They all just continued with what they were doing as the train picked up more and more speed. Eventually I collapsed, my fingers sliding down but still holding me in place as the concrete began skinning me alive. I screamed and shrieked for anyone to save me, but just like before, it was useless. There was no point, but the pain was just too much to bear, so I continued. Right as the train reached the threshold of the first tunnel, everything went dark. When I regained consciousness, I was on the train. I looked around and saw that this time, it was the train I took home. I patted myself down, feeling for anything out of the ordinary. My vision was back to normal. My head fog was gone. I didn't have any scrapes or anything. I let out a sigh of relief. The train began picking up speed again, and I decided to check my phone to see how much longer I had to get to my stop. But a cold sweat overtook me when I saw the time was only 11:30. I checked to make sure, but the date was the same. How could it have only been 14 minutes? How did I get on the train? What was going on? And as all those questions overtook me, a long since forgotten memory surfaced as I remembered who those people in the house were. They were the childhood friends I used to hang out with. A tear made its way down my face, signaling the initial cracks of a dam to burst. The ones I'd planned a future with, the people I promised I'd be friends with forever, the ones who went missing when I was 12. I'd made a promise as I cried over their disappearances back then, and I intend to keep it. I'm posting this here, not for you all, but for my family. So if I never make it back, they at least have a way of finding out why. We're not exactly on speaking terms, but if any of them happen to be reading this, I'm going to go find Emma, Connor, Olive, and Tyler. I know what I experienced was real. There's just no way a dream like that can fit into 14 minutes. I don't know what I experienced, but I think it was a sign that they're still out there. And I just can't stand keeping at this dead-end life without them. This is Henry Yaler, signing off. Back in the early 1990s, my uncle worked on board a commercial fishing vessel out of Cape Cod, Massachusetts. It was a 95-foot trawler operated by a 7-man crew and would take regular runs anywhere between a few days to a week out at sea. It was a dangerous job. The North Atlantic was a cold, cruel place. When you're 100 miles from shore in the middle of a storm, with waves battering the rusted hull of your boat, your only protection from the fury of the sea, you really feel true isolation and terror. For those who aren't familiar, trawling is a fishing method which involves casting a net into the ocean and dragging it steadily through the water, picking up anything that gets caught. The net would then be pulled out of the water, and the crew would sort out which fish to take to market and which to throw back. Bycatch was very common. Oftentimes, other animals would inadvertently get caught in the net, such as dolphins, seabirds, small sharks, seals, and sea turtles. Those would be released back into the sea, but not without almost certainly being injured or killed by the net. It pained my uncle to see these creatures like this, but he was young and had to put food on the table for his new family. However, the ocean does not make it easy to do this kind of work. Commercial fishing was a risky endeavor. It wasn't uncommon for entire crews to die out there. That was a possibility that weighed on my uncle's mind every time a storm was brewing while he was at sea. One such trip finally made him quit, and to this day, the memory of his former friend and crew member still haunts him. It was supposed to be a short, 3-day trip to bottom trawl for halibut. Being the dead of winter, the crew did not want to be exposed to the unpredictable weather for too long. The quote often goes, "If you don't like the weather in insert place, just wait 5 minutes and it will change." Everyone says this about their region, but the quote was first penned by Mark Twain, specifically about New England. The trip started on a brisk but Sunday morning, but as the day went on, dark storm clouds gathered and stayed in the region for the entire duration. Out there, scattered showers pelted the crew and towering waves rammed and tossed their boat. The cold and the wet chilled their fingers to the bone, making a difficult job even harder. Then they began to notice barnacles spreading through the hull, starting at the bow. They were few at first, staying well below the waterline, but as the day progressed, more and more appeared, growing unusually fast. Their captain, Mateo, was puzzled, for the crew had recently removed all of the barnacles before heading out. How could they return so quickly? But since that was an issue that was much lower on their list of priorities, they chose to ignore it for the time being. That first night, while my uncle was enjoying his 4 hours of sleep, he had an unusual dream, one where he was standing at the bottom of the ocean, looking up at the surface far above him. Though he was underwater, he was breathing perfectly fine. The light above was a pale pink-purple hue, shifting and pulsing with the flow of the water. All around, the carcasses of fish, squid, whales, and other sea creatures rained down in slow motion, leaving trails of bubbles in their wake. Then, the sea grew darker, enveloping him in a shroud of complete blackness. With it came a long, deep rumble in the distance, which caused his entire body to vibrate. The light coming from the surface faded, and right when the last inkling disappeared, he woke up. In the morning, he casually mentioned his unusual dream to the others, thinking nothing of it. But when they heard his story, their faces went flush, and they reluctantly admitted that they too had experienced similar dreams. Though not exactly like my uncle's, they each saw their own version of it. Lancaster, the fisherman whom my uncle was closest friends with, said that in his dream, instead of standing on the ocean floor, he was hovering with hundreds, even thousands of feet of water above and below him. He couldn't even tell there was a floor to begin with. Then, as the darkness closed in around him, and the grinding, bellowing noise came, he looked down. Slowly the ground opened up, a yellow glow emanating from the newly formed fissure. As the fissure grew wider and wider, he suddenly realized what he was looking at with an enormous eye. Despite this, Lancaster and the others, being the tough-as-nails blue-collar men that they were, did not let their demeanors falter in front of each other. They brushed the dreams off and stayed focused on the work ahead. They still had several tons of fish to catch and a fat payout to chase. Lancaster, however, was especially quiet after that. That day, they were at the mercy of the waves, which came with more aggression than before. Some were nearly 10 feet tall and hammered the deck, soaking the men in freezing cold water. The barnacles had grown even more, and by now they were beginning increased drag on the vessel. It was when the crew approached the continental shelf that things would take a turn for the worse. Right before the drop-off, the crew lowered the drag arms and tossed the trawl nets down, cruising at a steady 3 knots to drag the nets on the bottom of the ocean. All went well at first until the starboard net had suddenly been caught. This was not usually a concern, but as hard as the crew tried, they could not pull it free. On the sonar, they saw a large, indistinct shape in the water, right behind their trawl. The outline of it was hazy. They couldn't determine what exactly the shape was. At first, they thought it was a school of fish, but that didn't explain what was keeping their net from moving. As they watched, the shape grew larger and larger. Mateo scoffed that the transducer must have been malfunctioning. They tried to reel the net in, hoping to cut their losses before it took too much damage, but the winch wouldn't budge. Whatever was holding the net in place, it was too strong for the winch to pull. By now, the engine was straining, and the stronger they pulled, the more the boat's starboard side was pulling down, tipping it dangerously into the water. Black smoke billowed from the exhaust as the engine began to shut down. In all the chaos, my uncle looked over at Lancaster and noticed he had completely blanked out. At first, my uncle thought he was frozen in fear, but that didn't make sense, because Lancaster had more experience than him, and was no stranger to high-intensity situations like this. He remembered how shocked Lancaster was in the morning, and realized something must have really gotten to him. But this was no time to ask. My uncle grabbed him and had him assist in hand-pumping diesel fuel into the engine until they could get the air out of the line. If the engine failed, they would be stranded at sea. Whatever it was that had a hold of the trawl net, it was unfathomably strong. Then, after struggling for what felt like forever, the net finally came free and the men were able to reel it in. On the sonar, the shape quickly withdrew, as if it was just an anomaly on the screen. They managed to revive the engine and sped away from the area, not wanting to stick around any longer. The drag arms brought the nets up onto the deck, and the men quickly sorted through their fresh catch. Immediately they realized among the creatures they had dragged up was an enormous oarfish, an absolute monster from the deep. It looked to be about 30 feet long. Though it was dead, the body was still fresh, meaning it couldn't have died too long ago. One crew member, Isaac, wondered if that was what caught the net, but the idea was quickly dismissed because there was simply no way an animal could have done that, and the thing detected by their sonar was much, much bigger. Still, the men were puzzled by their very unusual find. Oarfish typically lived at depths of up to 1,000 meters, and would only come to the surface if they were sick or dying. On rare instances, they were caught by fishermen, or their carcasses would wash ashore. Another crew member, Ortega, warned that oarfish were bad omens, and that they should throw it back as quickly as possible. The others, including my uncle, objected the idea, and reassured Ortega that everything would be fine. They decided to keep the oarfish as a memento. After putting all their catch on ice in the hold down below, they put the oarfish on a hook and hung the carcass with cordage from one of the drag arms. Looping their course back to shore, my uncle realized that Lancaster had been silent the entire time, and when his eyes weren't locked in a dead stare, he was constantly taking nervous glances at the oarfish. My uncle asked him what was wrong, but Lancaster didn't know. He just felt that there was something off about the carcass, a looming sense of dread that he couldn't explain. "We really should have thrown it back," he finally said. That night, the two were working together as the others slept. Lancaster had grown increasingly distant, barely responding to my uncle, and when he did, he merely gave quick one-word answers. Multiple times my uncle caught him leaned against the railing, staring off into the inky blackness of the ocean. In one final instance, his head struck out so far that it looked like one bad wave could send him overboard. My uncle had to stop him. He grabbed Lancaster by his shoulders and demanded, "What has gotten into you?" Lancaster, unfazed by the jolt he had received, asked in a calm monotone, "Do you see it?" "See what?" my uncle replied. Lancaster's behavior made him finally admit there was something deeply wrong with his friend. Maybe the sea was finally getting to him, or was it something worse? He struggled to stop his mind from tumbling down the slope of possibilities he did not want to go. Lancaster simply continued staring, his gaze as empty as the endless void below them, as if to say that his silence was the answer. My uncle felt a chill run down his spine. He let go, afraid and unsure of what to do. "Sit tight," he said, shivering. The air was freezing cold, as it had been the entire trip, but he did not feel it biting into him until this very moment. "I'll get Mateo, okay?" Lancaster didn't respond. Instead, he turned back to face the sea again. My uncle rushed below deck to wake the captain, who was a bit grumpy at first for being interrupted from what little sleep he had, but obliged to go up and help. Stepping out of the cabin, they stopped. Lancaster was gone. All that met them was the wet, limp body of the oarfish, swaying back and forth with the gentle rocking of the vessel, its silvery scales reflected hauntingly in the pale yellow deck lights. Along its body was a massive gash, revealing its hollowed-out insides completely void of internal organs, like an empty, discarded husk. They woke the rest of the crew, and soon all 6 men were desperately searching for Lancaster. They searched the entire vessel and shined their lights into the water in case he had gone overboard. Mateo swung the boat around, frantically scanning the water for any sign of him. Taking a closer look at the oarfish, their stomachs dropped when they realized it didn't look like something or someone had cut it open and gutted the carcass. It looked like something inside had torn its way out. Not taking any more chances, the crew cut the oarfish loose and tossed it overboard to be reclaimed by the sea. Following the disappearance of Lancaster, the Coast Guard led a massive search effort to find him. Sadly, they had to admit that, judging by the conditions of the sea at that time of year, he would have died very quickly from hypothermia shortly after entering the water. After that, scavenging marine life would have picked the body apart. Their only hope was to recover any human remains they could, any trace of him to bring back to his family. Sadly, nothing was ever found. My uncle expressed his condolences to Lancaster's family, and to this day, He deeply regrets leaving his friend all alone on that cold night. My name is Jem, and this is the story on how being a horror movie buff at a young age saved my life. To start off, I should tell you that I lived in a very old, broke town in North Carolina from age 10 to 16. I lived on the same street as a graveyard full of Confederate soldiers, and it was just generally not the safest town you could imagine. I believe the town is very haunted, because this isn't my only story. This is just one of the ones I happen to have experienced with other witnesses to the event. Our town was surrounded by deep woods, and I played there all the time. During the day, only during the day. At night it was terrifying, and I always felt like I was being watched, so I avoided them after the sun went down. One day during the summer, when I was around 13, all four of my brothers went to have a boys' night at their friend's house while I had all my girlfriends stay at my house. It was a blast. We watched movies, ate junk food, danced around the house to music, all the fun sleepover stuff you'd expect out of teenage girls. The area we lived in didn't have light pollution, so we could see the stars. The night was a clear night, so we went out onto the lawn to stargaze. So my 5 friends and I all laid out in the grass and were there for probably about an hour until we noticed there was noise coming from the graveyard. We all shut up so that we could listen to whatever it was. There had previously been sacrifices at the graveyard, but that's a whole different story. We just wanted to make sure we weren't about to be murdered by a bunch of asshole kids trying to summon a demon. Again. After listening for a moment and not hearing anything, we all laughed it off. That is, until we heard someone call out. And then we went silent again. Someone was screaming from inside the graveyard. Someone was screaming for me. Someone who sounded exactly like my oldest brother. I should explain that my brother was overprotective of me and always had been. Anytime there was danger, he would tell me to run as fast as I could until I got home. He also always made a point to tell me that if something bad were to happen to him, that I should just run and not look back. So hearing my brother scream my name was extremely off-putting and out of character. Still, I could hear him screaming, "Jem, help! Come help me!" My friends and I all jumped up off the ground together, but they started down the street. I, however, am now and always have been a horror movie fanatic. I told them to stop because something was very much not right. I pulled out my flip phone and called my brother's cell. "Hello?" He answered, sounding annoyed as any older brother would have, to his kid sister calling him while he was over at his friend's place. "Jack, why are you screaming my name from the graveyard? You know we aren't supposed to go there after dark," I said angrily, because first of all, he was breaking the rules, and second of all, this prank was not funny. Not at all. Then I paused as I heard the sound of Pokemon being played on the Nintendo 64 in the background. "Jem, I'm not in the graveyard. I'm at Corey's house." I looked back up and down the road at the graveyard. There was a figure under the light, and it screamed my name again. This time, though, along with my brother's voice, was some sort of distorted sound underneath. "Jem, get in the house now," I heard my brother say suddenly. There was an edge of panic in his voice. "Go inside and lock the doors. That's not me." I yelled at my friends to get inside immediately. We ran inside and locked the doors, as well as going around to make sure the windows were locked too. We all huddled in the living room after closing the blinds. 2 of my friends were crying and wanted to go home, but my mom wasn't back home from work yet. There was no way any of us were going back outside. We could hear something outside, so I took everyone upstairs and told them all to stay there and to ignore anything else they heard. I had a baseball bat. Not that I could have done anything at 4'2", weighing 70 pounds, but I was ready to at least try in the case that something actually happened. Eventually we fell asleep, and by morning the thing was gone. But to my absolute horror, there were tracks outside the house that looked like something had been dragging its foot behind it as it walked. I encountered the mimic a few more times before I moved away, but I always ignored it because, well, that's what you're supposed to do. Thank God I watched horror movies and knew better than to make the classic mistake of investigating the weird noises in the graveyard. But last night, I heard my brother call my name outside my window. He's thousands of miles away from me. I was 17 when this happened. It was in the summer of 1998. Me and my friend, we'll call him Dennis, used to drink and smoke. I know, we were underage and shouldn't have, but when everyone else at your high school is shooting dope and snorting coke, I feel that drinking a little Bud Light and smoking a few cigarettes a year before you are legally allowed to is comparatively fine. Our parents and the cops didn't see it that way, however, so we had to find a place that was secretive. After a lot of trial and error, once involving me nearly having to spend a day in jail, but that's a story for another day, we eventually found out that smoking and drinking under the cover of night at the local graveyard was the best way to stay out of trouble. It was freaky at night, but once you had a good buzz going, you stopped caring. So, this graveyard had this small mausoleum in it. The city paid for it to house the corpse of some sheriff who'd apparently caught some really bad serial killer way back when. The mausoleum had no doors on it, but just this rusty old gate. Weird, right? Anyway, if you went inside, you'd see a few steps downward that eventually led to this fabled sheriff's coffin. We used to throw our beer cans down those steps. We were stupid and drunk kids, okay? Just remember that mausoleum. I know that I always will. So one night, we were doing our usual, smoking and drinking. It was about 2 a.m. The grass was wet due to a heavy rainstorm the night before. We were actually just about to leave when Dennis suddenly turned to me with this look of bewildered horror on his face. He pointed to that old mausoleum with a shaking finger. "Hey man, what the fuck is that?" he stammered. I looked to where he was pointing and froze in terror. The rusty hinges squealed like mice as that thing opened those dreadful black gates and stepped into the small amount of white light cast by the full moon. It was a skeleton. It stood there for a moment just observing our terrified and shaking forms. Its clean, white as paper bones gleaming in the pale moonlight. Its black eye sockets directed at us. It was wearing a hat, the type worn by sheriffs back in the times of cowboys and cattle rustlers. Hooked around one of its ribs was a rusty golden star with the word sheriff etched across it. In its right hand, it carried an antique revolver that looked like it would explode if fired, and in its left, one of our empty Bud Light cans. It pointed the revolver directly at me and threw the empty beer can to the floor. It spoke in a horrifically high-pitched voice that sounded exactly like the voice of Judge Doom at the end of Who Framed Roger Rabbit. "I've got a bone to pick with you," it cried in that awful tone and fired the gun. As I had previously predicted, the old and battered gun exploded, but not before a bullet managed to exit it. The bullet whizzed through the air and became embedded into a tree maybe an inch away from my right ear, sending pieces of bark flying outward, its course altered by the sudden explosion. After the smoke from the explosion had cleared, it became apparent that the skeleton's fragile arm obviously couldn't handle the sudden increase in force, and had exploded along with the firearm. White bone fragments littered the grass along with the smoldering internals of the gun. "Jesus fuck, man, let's go!" I yelled to Dennis and we ran. While making our hasty escape, we heard that thing laughing in that high-pitched voice. All the while, my mind yammered. It wasn't a dude in a costume. You could see through the gaps in its rib cage. It wasn't a dude in a costume. You could see through the gaps in its rib cage. We made it back to our home safely. We tried to forget it, but I just couldn't. So the next day, I went back to where we saw that thing. The bullet was still in the tree, and the pieces of bone and revolver were still in the grass. I opened the gate to the mausoleum and saw wet footprints leading down the steps toward the coffin. Skeletal footprints. This happened 30 years ago, but still keeps me up at night. I was 17 at the time, and me and my best friend John were spending the summer hanging out and getting into all kinds of trouble. I don't really recall who dared who, but we decided we would break into this old jelly factory that had been abandoned for over 20 years. We met up at the front of the factory right after sunset with just a flashlight each. We went around the factory looking for a way in. The moon was out, which gave us a good view of the building. It loomed over us, 5 floors of cold gray concrete. The ground level had no windows, but some of the upper levels did. Most of them were broken by kids from the neighborhood throwing rocks. We were looking for a window on the first floor that was as open as possible, so we could try to lift each other in without cutting ourselves. That's when we noticed the open doors. 2 large factory doors just standing there fully open. We didn't really think about it. We just looked at each other, shrugged, and went in. Inside, the temperature immediately changed. It was much colder with a soft breeze, which I figured was draft. It felt like entering a cave. What stood out most was how dark it was. Pitch black. I could barely see my hand in front of my eyes. Again, we didn't think much about it. Even though I felt my spine tingling, we turned on our flashlights and shone into the darkness. You couldn't see the other side. We started walking. In the distance, we could see a small greenish light. That's probably an emergency exit sign, I said. The stairs are probably near it. Let's go there so we can go up. After walking for a while, we realized that the light didn't appear to be getting any closer. That's when John turned around and yelped. I turned around quickly. "The entrance, it's gone," he said. I tried to reassure him. He was always the one that got spooked easily. "Probably just a cloud blocking the moonlight," I replied. "Nothing to worry about. Come on, let's go." We continued walking towards the light, but again we weren't getting any closer. By now, John's nerves had really gotten to him. "Tim, I'm scared. Let's go back," he said. I would have tried to talk it out of him, but we never admitted to being scared to one another. So for him to say that meant that he was about to shit himself, and I have to admit I was scared myself too. "Okay," I said. We turned around and walked back the way we came. That's when our flashlights started flickering. Fuck. John started hitting his flashlight in a panic. "I just charged mine today." "Yeah, mine's going out too," I replied. "How can that be?" he yelled. "I don't know, but let's get moving now that we have some light." We started walking, and slowly our flashlights gave up on us. I could hear John's breathing getting heavier and heavier. "It's okay, John," I said, trying to comfort him. "Just keep walking, I'm right here with you." That's when all of a sudden it felt like something hit my head hard. I remember going down, my ears ringing. The next thing I remember is waking up in the pitch black, laying on the floor, tasting blood. The memory of where I was flooded back in an instant, and filled with adrenaline I jumped back up. "John?" I yelled. "I'm right here." I heard him reply from a couple of feet away. "Walk towards me. It's okay." At least he seemed to have pulled himself together. I walked towards his voice until I bumped into him. "I must have fainted," I said. "That's okay," he replied. "Let's get out of here." As he said it, a shiver of light shone through the darkness. It was the door. We ran towards it as fast as we could. We rushed out, feeling the warmth of the summer right upon us. I was panting, hands on my knees from the run. "I'm finally out," John said. "Yeah, we made it out, man. Can you believe this?" I looked up at John, surprised at how relaxed and composed he appeared. Well, he was so nervous just a few minutes ago. "How long was I out for?" I asked. "Long enough," he replied. "Long enough?" That's when I looked into his eyes and realized this wasn't John. That was 30 years ago. It has lived its life as if it were John. No one else seems to have noticed, and I'm sure as hell not going to expose it publicly. But in case you meet John, no, it's not him.